So I think we'll talk next about kind of my uh, history and exposure to the world of like business, and really for me, I do mean like my own personal pursuits.
Yeah.
I want to set this up with some openness and transparency in what we're talking about. Um, for a few years, I think from the time I was 19, maybe 20 until 22 or 23, uh, I was involved with a network marketing organization. Josh, how familiar are you with network marketing as a business?
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty familiar with it. Are we talking? I don't mean to be blunt, but are we talking like pyramid scheme type of stuff here, or slightly different?
Kinda. Well,
Well, dive into it. Give me some background.
yeah. So there is a business model. Network marketing. It's also called multi-level marketing.
Yeah.
And I'll give you kind of the friendly way of talking
Yeah.
about this, right? Which
Yeah.
is, hey, there's a company that makes products, and you buy those products at a wholesale price, and then you can resell those products at a premium, and you can profit off of the sale of those products.
Yeah.
And the cost of entry is very low. It's not nearly what you would need to pay if you wanted to start a business on your own.
Yeah.
But it works a little bit like a wholesale reseller relationship, right?
Yeah.
With an added element that you can also bring other people in to start their own businesses. And there is a small amount of benefit to you as the person who connected them into the business, as you get, right? You never make as much money off of their work as they do, but there is a benefit to growing your network, right?
Yeah.
Now that's the very, I think, friendly way of characterizing it, and it's to some degree I think there is some merit to the business model. They do a lot to make sure that they are aligning with the expectations of like direct sales, which is another kind of broad category for the group. Um, there is an incredible, um, I would say, predatory nature to that
Yeah.
work as well.
Yeah.
Now, for what it's worth, the people that I was connected to did not subscribe to that attitude, at
Okay.
least not in the one-on-one day-to-day conversations that we had. But the community group, the kind of mentorship organization that we were connected to, had a lot of those threads in it. There were speakers who would talk about new people turning 18 every day, and they would talk about it in a very profit focused way. Um, I was involved for about 3 years,
Okay.
and thankfully, I don't believe that there were any significant negative impacts on anybody that either brought into the business or connected with besides. I've done my best to engage with folks since then and apologize, I think, as best I can. But at the same time, I recognize that I kind of fell prey to a a well crafted narrative. um, Now, thinking back on this, right, thinking about what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, I think it's important to also highlight that this was another environment where I was able to defer to authority.
Yeah.
I found people who I respected, who were willing to teach me something I didn't know, and I do still believe that those people largely have good intentions, had good intentions. But it again was an environment where I had authorities that I could listen to, that I respected, that even if they spent time trying to reinforce my individual agency, were still leading down a path that ultimately I recognized was not for me and was not good. Um, I'm doing my very best here to speak honestly about what this was,
Yeah.
while also being kind to the people that I was connected to, because again, I hold very strongly that nobody there that I was directly involved with had nefarious intent. Um,
Hmm.
but I think it is important to be able to reflect on that candidly, um, and it's very easy to see from the outside how blinded I might have been.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
So was it did you feel, and maybe, I mean, I'm just, this is probably more out of my own curiosity, but
sure.
I am very curious. Like, over those 3 years that you were part of this, did it change to get to something that you felt was causing harm or wasn't right for you, or were there quick changes throughout those 3 years that, hey, like, this is not what it was when I first started, type of thing?
I think the care and attention up front in that environment is to filter out people who would view things critically.
Mm-hmm.
There is a mechanism of kind of drawing people in that almost works a little bit like a funnel. Like if you think about it in a marketing and business context, right?
Totally.
Um, they taught some practical skills, right, which is like going out and engaging with people in community, how to have conversations, how to connect with people, and to a large degree how to filter through the people who may or may not think that way. Now, the wrapper that this is all under is business, is profiting, right? And there is a very, I think, like refined narrative associated, right? Not everybody's going to get it. 95% of businesses fail in the first 5 years. Some people just aren't cut out for the world of business. And so you ask these questions, you guide that conversation in an effort to figure out if they're the kind of people that, that want and need this opportunity.
Yeah.
I think it was always that way. but I also feel as though it was very well constructed to figure out if I was the kind of person who would be critical of that sort of system, that sort of structure. And, for what it's worth, there were a lot of people that I engaged with since who saw it and who openly said, hey, I think this is not the best thing. Um, the narrative is very consistent,
Mm-hmm.
and the people involved are very consistent.
Yeah.
And there was always a thread of thinking for yourself. I think on a day-to-day basis I was regularly told, hey, don't just do this, don't just do these kinds of things because I'm telling you to do them. Do these kinds of things because they make sense to you. And so I think it was very hard for me to see that um, ulterior motive, because all of my interactions on a day-to-day basis were with people who felt as though they had my best interest in mind. And I do largely hold that they did. Um, yeah, but I do think it was kind of always that way. It was just very hard to see in the structure and the conversations that we had.
Yeah, totally, totally. And I guess, like, as you started to come to realization of what you were doing and not being satisfied or happy, or whatever word you want to use there, I guess, what kind of reflection did you have in the moment, and where did that lead you in the immediate? Like, what did you start exploring when you realized that, hey, this multi-level marketing, it's not what I thought it was, it's not right for me?
Well, one thing I felt immediately, but it took me a long time to really like recognize for myself, is that I'm really not motivated by money. I found myself losing the motivation as I started to realize that it was not specifically about benefiting the people involved. For a long time, I think I had recognized and believed that giving people an opportunity was intrinsically beneficial to them. And that even if they didn't ultimately make money, it's okay because they're getting into an environment where they can refine and grow.
Mhm.
I took a lot of good away from those relationships, away from that mentorship. There was a lot of very helpful thought that was in and around this whole system. But when I realized that it was not necessarily benefiting everybody personally, and that the motivation to keep going had to be that I was interested in being wealthy, I kind of got disillusioned, and I don't know that I've honestly like gone back and had a conscious conversation with the folks I was involved with, but at the same time, it sort of just faded. And at some point I realized, hey, I don't really think this is for me. And I reached out to the guy that I was connected to and said, hey, I just want you to know, like, I'm no hard feelings, but I'm not going to be connected to this anymore. Um, I think the reflection I've done since has been mostly on how that narrative,
Mhm.
that being wealthy is how you help people, is harmful. Um, I
Yeah.
think we've talked about this on the side, Josh, in the past, but I have a very hard time seeing activity that is explicitly for profit as intrinsically useful. I
Mhm.
think in a small business context, it's different because the impact of that, that profit seeking, if I could put it that way,
Sure.
is less exploitative. But as you get to a point where you're trying to just make a lot of money for money's sake, I think it's very hard for it to not be exploiting, right?
Oh.
And that I think was kind of that maybe trigger point for me. Oh no, this is exploitative in a way that I can't justify by talking about the benefits to that individual. This might actually be, if they even if they don't feel that it's causing harm, this might actually be harming them.
Yeah.
Um, Now again, I think that it's possible to engage with systems like this in a way that is not intrinsically exploitative. But I think if you do that, you're not going to be very successful. That's what I found.
Yeah.
That because I was not interested in taking advantage of people, and once I started to recognize that's what it was, I lost that steam. I think. Um,
Yeah.
does that make sense?
It makes total sense. It's yeah. As soon as that realization came in, the moral compass kicked in, and it was like, hey, no, like let's flip around too, and
Well,
um,
and I have to be honest with myself about what led to that for me, right? Again, like we just talked about in the religious context, this was another environment where I could lean on people who I respected, who were in a position of authority as I perceived it, right? And again, it gave me an opportunity to emulate the thoughts and opinions of people that I respected.
yeah,
In private reflection, with my partner and I, we've talked about this, that there is a tremendous amount of risk for me